I'm Jody Herman. I've got Scott Duke and Todd Berger with me this morning, and welcome to HD Dynamics D365 Virtual User Group Workshop. We'll be hosting these every 2 weeks on a Thursday morning at 9:30, just to keep that on your calendar and expect those invitations coming out. Today we're going to start on a series of Power Automate as a part one and see what we can get through in 1 hour. In the meantime, there's also a chat feature on the Teams meeting. If anybody has any questions throughout this presentation, feel free to pop us a chat. We'll try and answer it. If not, we'll pose it to Todd to see if we can get a resolution to that question during this session. So, Todd, I'll hand it over to you to start off with our part one series of Power Automate.
Very good. Thank you, everyone, for joining. So yeah, today we're going to talk about Power Automate. Just for a quick scan of the virtual room, how many of you have either heard of Power Automate or know what it is? Just kind of want to get a baseline of kind of what everybody's level is here.
Christy and I have not heard of it, and Christy's not going to join on her own. We're sharing.
Okay, no problem. Anyone else?
Yeah, I've heard of it.
No idea what it is.
Okay, great. All right, so it sounds like most people are unfamiliar with it. So let me just go here. So yeah, as Jody mentioned, we're going to get through as much as we can today, probably just talk about it at a high level. I'll give a brief demo of creating a flow and like how, that kind of works. But more just want you to kind of take away an understanding of what Power Automate is and what it can do, and kind of start thinking about how you can apply that to your own businesses. Because it is a very, very powerful tool that Microsoft came out with maybe 2 or 3 years ago, about 3, but it's only really come into its own here in the last, I'd say, 6 to 9 months, because they've really dumped a lot of effort into developing this thing out and making it a really powerful tool. So I'll go into some of those details, as well as some of the possibilities as well. All right, so Power Automate. So what is it? It is a business process automation tool. So think about a lot of people, if you're familiar with D365 CRM or F&O or any of those, they have kind of the workflow engine, right? Like internally, anything that you want to automate within D365, you can utilize what they're now calling the classic workflow engine, which allows you, to trigger things when you update this, go update this, or send emails out, and like all kinds of different automations, right? Well, this is like workflow on steroids, in that it does a lot of similar types of things, in that you want to, you use it for automation purposes, but, and it can replace a lot of the Dynamics workflows that you may currently have in there. And eventually they're going to completely deprecate and turn off the classic workflow engine and replace it with Power Automate. So that is, Power Automate is the future of, automation for D365 and across the entire Microsoft stack. So that's one of the cool parts, is they made one single tool to kind of rule them all, so to speak. It does, it allows for connectivity between all types of different applications, not just D365. So as I mentioned, it's kind of stepping outside of D365 specifically, and allows connectors to thousands of different applications, as well as long as you have some sort of endpoint or you install the data gateway on your on-premise, you can connect to anything in the cloud basically that has a accessible API, or through these custom developed connectors if they don't already have one. Or you can even integrate with some on-premise data using the data gateway, which is pretty cool too. As far as, and one thing I forgot to put in here was about the subscription portion of this. So Power Automate can be subscribed to as a standalone product if you want to. But if you already have a D365 license, either customer engagement, any of the different D365 licenses, it automatically comes with, I think it's like 100,000 flows a month or in that realm. So you're not, like, unless you're using it super extensively, you're not going to ever exceed that amount. Or if you do, you can pay for additional, flows per month or whatever, if you're drastically exceeding that. But certainly starting out, you're not going to run into many problems there. And that increases, I believe that amount increases with your license capacity. So if you have lots of licenses, then you'll get more flows per month. But again, it can be, and I forget what the pricing is, for standalone, but it's, per flows per month, type of model. And it could be run completely standalone. So you don't necessarily have to have D365, but, given that's kind of the focus of this user group, I thought I'd focus it on, just the D365 portion. So any questions so far? Okay. So when should you use it? We get a lot of these kind of questions. It's like, okay, it sounds great and powerful and all this stuff. When do I want to use it? Because I can go build a workflow in 5 minutes, but it's going to take me 3 hours to figure out how to build this flow in Power Automate. So I will say that there's a bit of a learning curve to building these, but once you kind of get over that, then it's almost equal as far as how fast it's going to, how quickly you can build these out, and certainly based on complexity, because Power Automate is capable of doing way more complex things than the classic workflow engine ever was. You can extend it with some of the workflow extensions and things like that, but those are, it's custom code and stuff like that you may not want to support over a long period of time. Whereas if you build it in Power Automate, that's going to be supported for the foreseeable future by Microsoft, and continually to be developed and enhanced and updated and so forth. So anytime you want to replace a trigger-based or schedule, that's the other part that, whoops, sorry about that. That's the other part that the workflow engine couldn't do natively, was scheduling, which is, a huge need in my opinion, as far as, being able to schedule these automations. If you wanted to run things on a nightly basis and so forth, then you usually had to, write custom code to accomplish that. Using Power Automate, it's built in, schedule something to run every hour, every day, whatever, every month, whenever. And you can do pretty sophisticated things. So any trigger-based, and what I mean by trigger-based is something you do, and it doesn't necessarily have to be in D365 alone. It could be in Outlook, it could be in any of the, and it doesn't even have to be a Microsoft product, because there's tons of connectors that have various triggers, which I'll show you as part of the demo. If you update a record in one application, it sends an email or sends some record to another application or whatever. And there's all kinds of possibilities there. But the trigger means if you update something, if you create something, if you delete something, that creates kind of what we call a trigger to execute one of these flows. But as I mentioned, it can also be schedule-based as well. If you want it to execute on the hour, every day, every month, it doesn't matter. And what you're going to want to do with it is really, enhancing. If you have very repetitive processes, I always have, every time that, this type of case gets created or something, I have to go in and I have to change this and update that, or whatever. You can automate some of those very manual processes as long as it's very repetitive and it's very. It doesn't require a whole lot of just human eye to understand what to do. If it's very like you can follow a very specific logic, those things are super easy to build out inside of Power Automate. Additionally, if you, and a lot of what we're doing when we're going through with a lot of our customers now, and we're either migrating to the new unified interface or upgrading them to D365, something like that, then a lot of times if they have existing workflows or automations, we're replacing those with Power Automate workflows instead of building it in the classic interface, because as I mentioned, that is going to go away at some point. They haven't named a date, and I don't see it happening in the super near term. I'm guessing in the next year or two, they're going to try to completely sunset the classic workflow engine. And as part of that, I imagine they're going to have some sort of conversion tool that converts these workflows to Power Automate, because some of these organizations have thousands of workflows. And so obviously doing that, converting all that would be quite a task. But anytime you want to update and you're looking at it, you might want to consider just, hey, why don't we just get rid of this one classic workflow and replace it with a Power Automate and try to accomplish the same thing in the Power Automate. You can also do it for what I would call very light type of application integrations. It's not intended for large volume data integrations at all. You're going to run into some problems if you try to do that. But like passing one record from this system to that application, and it happens like 10 times a day or something like that, like that's a perfect application for Power Automate. Just individual records, those kind of things, but nothing major as far as a data integration goes. Any questions? Okay. So when shouldn't you use it? So as I mentioned, large scale, high volume data integration is not going to be a good application for Power Automate because it runs individually, per these triggers or schedules. However, if you do have something that might be, a nightly run or something like that, that's going to update like hundreds of records, that might be okay for something with Power Automate. But when you started getting into thousands of records or, large volume data, that's not going to work very well. And you're going to run out of your flow license pretty quickly too. Also to replace, you shouldn't use it to replace any real-time legacy workflows. So in D365, they have what is known as a background workflow, which makes it so basically it triggers it, and then happens in the background. It doesn't happen immediately or real time. That's exactly how Power Automate works. So those you can replace with Automate very easily. There's what's known as the real-time workflows, and currently with Power Automate you cannot do anything real time. It's always going to happen asynchronously in the background. So you're not going to be able to have a Power Automate that runs and you see the results immediately in front of you. Whereas the classic legacy workflow engine does have that capability. So right now today, you're not able to replace those types of workflows. So again, when is that going to be happening I imagine they're going to have to replace, have a replacement in Power Automate for that if they're going to ever completely sunset the workflow engine in D365. So I imagine that'll be on the roadmap here in the near term, probably in 2021, because I didn't see it on the roadmap here for the October release.
Todd, we have a question from Kira. Kira,
yes. Hi, Kira.
You're muted right now, Kira.
It was answered. Sorry, you're good. I put my hand back down. Sorry. Sorry about
No problem. So again, if you want to replace right now we can't replace with the real-time legacy workflows. That still has to be accomplished, using the classic workflow engine. But the background processes, you can replace all those, and for the most part, any of those workflow extensions that you might have installed to enhance the capabilities of the workflow engine. I really haven't seen a lot of those that you can't do the same thing inside of Power Automate. There's a few that are very specific that aren't really available yet, but for the most part, you can replace 90% of those workflow extensions using Power Automate and natively without doing anything additional. So it's a pretty powerful tool. So if there's no further questions, I will go into a demo. Okay, so I have, we just have a demo environment set up for D365. So what I was going to demo today was just a very basic type of flow that we can build out pretty quickly, just to kind of give you a flavor of some of the things that are available. So if you have any questions along the way, feel free to ask, but we're, sorry, hold on. Sorry about that. Sorry, one of my kids walked in on me, so it threw me off. So let's see. On the flows, right now I'm in the makepowerapps.com tool. So if you're not familiar with that, that's kind of the new builder tool that you can go in for all Power Apps. This isn't just specific to Dynamics 365. This is where they're going to, if you subscribe for just standalone Power Apps or Power Automate, this is the same tool that you're going to be using. And they're trying to consolidate all these kind of different admin, type tools and so forth that are out there to just a single location, so that it makes it much more straightforward. So you can kind of go to one place and build out everything you need. So if you notice in the top right, you always want to make sure to first confirm that you are in the correct environment. Certainly would recommend, for those that have D365 and a sandbox environment, that you're going to build this out first in the sandbox environment and test it out and do all those things. Certainly best practice to do it that way. So in this particular case, I don't have, because this is a demo environment, I don't have a sandbox environment, so I'm going to do it in the quote-unquote production. If there were a sandbox environment, it would just be another checkbox that says like sandbox, and then you would just select that instead. But always make sure that you're in the right environment when you start building these things out. So another thing is, you may be tempted to go in here and just go straight to the flows in here and start building out, and that's certainly a path you can go. But as a best practice, you're always going to want to create a solution, especially if you're building out in a sandbox, because then that makes it so that you can easily just export it out of your sandbox and import it into your production environment when it's ready. And all the things will transfer over, and the new environment will get applied for the flow, so that you'll have flows in both environments, sandbox and production and so forth. So instead of having to recreate the wheel each time, if you just want to go and play around with it, then it's probably fine just to go in here. But if you know this is something you're going to build out and want to export and import into your production, definitely do it inside a solution first. So I'm going to create a new solution. Oops. Oh. Okay, then that appears in there. So once you've created the solution, you can click on the solution. No components in here yet, I just created it. So I'm going to go up here to the new. You can add existing if there's existing things you want to pull in, but I'm going to create a new option and flow. So another option that you're going to see in here is UI flow. This is a new tool. I may actually demo this on the next call, but I wanted to just do a very high level Power Automate overview first. But UI flow is really cool, and they're enhancing it. What that basically does is it records your actions and tries to create a flow based on those actions. So it's kind of like a new version of remember the macro recorder on like either Word or Excel, where you could like record a macro and it would do all the actions that you're doing. Same idea here with the UI flow, but you can do it across different applications. So for example, if you update a record in D365 and then you have to kind of swivel chair and update into another application, you could record those actions and it would actually try to build out a flow as best as it can to do those exact things for you. So it'll get you like 90% of the way there, and then you just have to make a few tweaks and you're off and running. So it's a really cool concept, and they're continuing to enhance it. They've got a lot of updates in that upcoming in October, so I'm excited about that. But today we're just going to do a regular flow. You'll notice absent from here is the old classic workflow. So they don't even have it as an option on here. They're just really, really trying to push you to use Power Automate. The only way to create those classic workflows is inside the classic editor now. But all the other things like entities and all those kind of things, if you want to pull those in, existing processes you can pull in, like existing workflows, but you'll see once it shows up in here, if you click on it, it just opens it up in the classic editor. And but anything new, you can't create it unless you're in the classic editor. So I'm going to click on flow, open that up. So first thing you'll see is it comes up with some of these connectors. So these are all the connectors I was talking about that are available, and these are just common triggers that can be used. But there are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of these connectors that are available to all types of different applications, not just Microsoft at all. There's actually tons of them across every type of application you can think of. And so you can just start typing things, and you'll see if there's a connector available. If there's a readily available connector, then down here is where you'll see some of the triggers, and that's what I was talking about. In this case, we're going to do a trigger-based workflow, or sorry, Power Automate flow. So what I was going to do is just kind of show a brief example of one, maybe in like an account, for example. And this is something that you couldn't do with the classic workflow. So that's one reason I wanted to do something like this, where we get a lot of these types of requests. There are some workflow extensions you can use, but again, hesitate to use those on a regular basis just because you're relying on third-party tools to kind of do things for you, whereas this is built in. But a lot of times if you have a parent record and you want to update child records, that's a very frequent request that we get from customers that say, I just want to do this. Sounds super simple. Like, I'm in an account. If I update the account address, I want to update the contact address. Like, you would think like, oh, that would be a 10-minute thing. Well, it's not. It's actually fairly complicated. And right now, you either have to use a variety of workflow extensions to accomplish that, or you have to write custom plugin, which requires custom code. So a lot of people get surprised by those kind of things. But so that is a frequent request, and now today you can accomplish that with Power Automate very easily. So what I'll show you is an example of, let's just say these, if we change this address, that it's supposed to copy it down to the child records. So right now, if I open up the contact record associated with Patrick's or with the Alpine Ski House, you'll see Patrick, he has a different address. We'll just make that so that if I change it, it automatically changes all the child records. So one thing, they have deprecated the original Dynamics 365 connector. It's now the Common Data Service connector. So small nuance, but there, and to make it a little more confusing, there are currently multiple Common Data Service connectors. I don't necessarily know the reasons why behind that, but I do know that there are multiple right now, and some of them can do different things. So to make it less confusing, the one you really want to use all the time is the one that says current environment. So this says Common Data Service current environment. The only other time you would use the other one is, so see how this says Common Data Service current environment? That's the one you always want to use for Dynamics 365, unless you're doing an on-demand workflow. So if you think about if you're in D365 and you want to run an on-demand workflow, you can go and hit this flow button under here, and it'll load up all the different either classic and other flows, Power Automate flows that you have available. So in order to create those right now, I'm guessing eventually they're going to add this feature to the single connector here, the Common Data Service current environment one, but today that doesn't exist. So what you have to do is you have to find the one that's called record selected. And that is just says Common Data Service. It doesn't say current environment. So it's a little bit different, has different capabilities. If you use this one, you're not going to get nearly the amount of capabilities that you have, but it's the only way right now to be able to trigger an on-demand flow from this menu in here. Just want to point that out because that's a huge point of confusion. I completely understand why it's highly confusing. And I'm guessing they're going to fix this and make it more streamlined eventually, but right now today this is the way it works. So for our purposes of this demo, I'm going to just do a trigger based flow, which means it's going to trigger on when the account gets updated. So when I select the Common Data Service current environment one, you can choose what the trigger condition is. So this is relatively new. So they've given us a lot more options in here where you can do it very similar to the classic workflow engine. You can do it when it gets created or deleted, create or update, create, update, or delete, and so on. Now, the one thing I will say, while delete kind of sounds interesting, right now it doesn't have a way to know it doesn't provide any details of the record that's getting deleted. So if you think you're going to come up with some magical solution, if it deletes it to copy information somewhere or something like that, think again. So it doesn't have any details of the record that got deleted. It just knows something got deleted. So not quite as useful as it could be yet. I imagine they'll enhance that too in the future. But for our purposes today, we'll just do a update. So if I choose update, I then have to go in and select which entity I'm talking about. So we'll go with accounts. And then scope, very similar to the workflow engine that you're used to. There's a scope of user, business unit, or organization. So that just tells you, based on the current owner of this record that's getting triggered, which records are going to, is this just specific to the owner that's creating this connection, actually. So whatever business unit that this user is in, it could either be organization-wide, it could be specific to the business unit that the owner's in, or just this person. So if you're making one, this is just for me and nobody else, you would select user. If you're making it just for a business unit, and this gets into the security roles of D365, that you're, if it's just your business unit, say your department, you have it broken down into, a lot of different business units, and you don't want it to apply to other business units, you would select the business unit. If you want it organization-wide, you would do org. So I'll do organization-wide. And then furthermore, if you want this to actually trigger every single time that any account is updated anywhere, that's what this will accomplish. However, if you have, if you want to limit it, similar to the old workflow engine where you could say only if these fields change, you can do it just like that by filtering attributes. So I'll just do it for now. You would just type in the actual schema name of the field that you want it to trigger on, and in order to see that, you actually have to go into the fields, and you can look them up inside of here if you wanted to go into and bring those in. You can look up the schema names of these if you don't know them off the top of your head. I happen to know them. And then additionally, they have, so these are just the attributes. This is just saying if these fields change. But this even has, this can take it one step further, where you can actually have a filter expression where it says only if it meets if this field changes and it meets this filter criteria. So I know a lot of people probably don't know OData style filter expressions. So one thing that you can do, and the tool I highly recommend, especially if you're an admin of one of these applications, is using the XRM Toolbox. So if you use the XRM Toolbox, it actually has this app called Fetch XML Builder, and you can build out these fetch strings. And then what it can also do under this view, once you kind of build out the filter criteria in here, just saying, so in our case, we're just doing an account where the status is active. So not a very useful filter in this case, but I just kind of wanted to show you the capabilities. So it'll build this out automatically as you go through and build it out over here. And then you can go to the view and notice it has this Power Automate parameters. So this is pretty cool. So you can go in and click on that. I've actually opened it up down here. And it will give you that OData style filter criteria. So all you have to do is click on it, and then it copies it to your clipboard. And then you can go back in here and just paste it in here. So what this will do is, as long as it's an active account and the address and the street is changed, we'll make this trigger. Oh, additionally, you can do a run as. So if you want it to run as either the owner, the record owner, or triggering user, what that's going to do is change, if it's the modified by, if you're modifying something, it'll change, who gets tagged as that modified by user. So sometimes that's important. If you don't select anything, it's always going to be the process owner. That's the default. So I'll just do triggering user. So after that, you hit the next add step, and you can add a step in here. And so we'll just say, again, we're going to select the common data service current environment, because this has a lot of different options in here. And in order to get like the child records, you have to say list records. So that'll get you. So if you know that there could be one or multiple records, then you're going to do a list records. So what I'm doing now is I'm finding the contacts that are associated with the parent account that triggered this flow. So I'm going to do contacts, and then it gives you, again, some of these queries to kind of build this out. And you can either skip this, or you can actually put in where the filter of, the record that you're trying to find. So again, looking at for OData style queries in here, or you can do a select query to return the entire data. Additionally, they do have fetch XML query, which is really nice. So again, going to go back into my Fetch XML builder, create a new. We're going to select the entity. In this case, we want to find contacts. I'll just do all attributes. That's fine. And then I'm going to add a filter and just say where the account ID. Sorry, parent customer ID, because that is the account, is equal, and then we're just going to plug in a generic GUID in here, but this will be your Fetch XML, so it's just saying where the parent account is, and then we're going to plug in the account ID from the record that triggers it. So over here, I'll just copy this fetch and plug it in here to the Fetch XML query. So instead of this ID value, we're going to put in a dynamic value from this previous step. So you'll notice when I highlight anything in here that it gives me these options over here on the right. So this is dynamic content, which provides you content from any of these steps that you're creating in here. So all prior steps will show up in here with information, with data. So this is from the when a record is created, updated, or deleted step, which is the very first step. If you keep scrolling, you'll see other steps down there as you continue to build upon this. Additionally, you can do all types of expressions. This gets a little more into the code realm. So you may or may not be comfortable with this, but it does provide a lot of functionality as far as converting information or transforming information, all types of kind of expressions. So if you're familiar with a lot of different formulas in Excel and things like that, this will be relatively familiar to you. So you can take information and kind of transform it into the format that you want. In our case, we just really want the ID of the account that triggered this whole flow in the first place. So we're going to go right in between the quotes, and instead of that 000 generic value, I'm going to look up I'm going to do a search on account. And so this is from the original account that got updated, and under here you'll see account unique identifier of the count. So that's what we want. We want to select that one, and then it'll plug this little thing in here. So kind of looks funky, but it'll work. So this is now your fetch query, which is going to tell you, give me any of the contacts that have this account that triggered it as the parent account. So on the next step, we actually have to do what's known as a control. So because it has to loop through all of these, each time it has to say, okay, get the first one and then go through and do this, get the next one. So what you choose is this control. Oops, sorry, wrong one. Meant to do that one. And under this control is apply to each. So control means it's a condition, right? If this, then, if this is true, then do this. Apply to each means we're going to go through this loop of any of the records that are found. If it doesn't find any, then it just says, nope, there aren't any, and just continues on. Or you can do a do until. There's all types of different controls that you can do. Are pretty cool. But in our case, we're going to do apply to each. If you want to know what these things do, you can click on this little guy, and it'll tell you kind of a brief summary of what it does. So in our case, we're going to say we're getting a list of records. We're going to have to loop through them. So let's do an apply to each. So because it's a list of records, we're going to want to do the list of items. So the value has all the list of items in there. So we're going to choose value. And then within this apply to each, now we're kind of within this loop, right? And if you want to go outside of the loop, you go down here, but within the loop, you hit add action here. So this is going to do the same thing for each of the records that it finds that match that. Again, if it doesn't match any, it's just going to say, nope, there aren't any, and just move on and just continue on. So we're going to select the current environment again, common data service, current environment, and we're going to say update a record. So this is the contact. We're going to want to update the contact record. And within here, we're going to have to tell it, this list records is getting the contacts. And so that list records will have a contact ID. So over here in the dynamic content for the item ID, that's the globally unique identifier, the GUID. Type in contact. And then you want to make sure it's coming from the list records option, which it is. And you're going to see contact, unique identifier of the contact. That's the one we're going to choose. And now we're just going to go quickly update from not the list records, but scroll down. And instead of, we don't want to do the list records because that's just going to update it with the same address. We're doing when a record is created, updated, or deleted step, because that's the account, really. And you can rename these if it makes more sense to you. You can go up here and you can hit rename that step. So it makes a little more sense. So if you say, if that makes more sense to you, then you can just rename it to something like that. So for first one, address one city, we're going to want to say, but we're going to have to scroll down to under here, account that triggered update. Okay, so I'm going to update this with city, with address one city. Address one, street one. I wish it would stay, but it doesn't. Address one, street two. You get the point. So we'll go through and update these. UPS zone. Where is it? Am I in the right one? No. UI. Okay, address one, zip postal, and so forth. So I don't think we have state. It's, you don't see the field, hit that. This is all the inside of the record. So there's a lot of them. State, province, there you go. Address one, state. Okay, so we've got the state, we've got address one, city, street one, street two, state, and zip. So we'll just leave it at that. Go ahead, and this isn't the most intuitive place to keep the title, but this is where the title is. So you can say update count child contact address. And then we're going to hit save. It'll save it eventually. Okay, so now I created it. So now you can actually go and test it. This is another nice feature of Power Automate is you can test these things straight in here. So you can go to test and then either say I'll perform the trigger action when you're on your first test, but if you have multiple, if you keep doing, the test after you run it once, then you'll have the existing data, so you don't have to keep triggering the action. You can just run it on that same, record each time, and it'll pretend like it, the trigger event actually happened. In this case, it's the first time, so I'm going to have to perform the trigger action. So I'm going to say I'll do it and then hit test. And then it's going to sit here and wait for me to actually update something. So I'm going to say, we're going to just change this 123 ABC Street and Irvine, California. Okay. So we'll do that. Now we're going to hit save, and that should trigger our action to update the child records. So we're saving, we're going to go back. You can see back to the flow screen, now it's saying it's running. Sometimes it takes a few seconds for it to load up. Or a minute. Take a coffee break. Let me get out of here. Oh, but there's a problem. So if I go back to the front screen, this tells me some more information about the, and then I'm going to have to fix the trigger. Oh, didn't like some of my criteria. Nope, address 1 street 1 not valid. That's fine. Pretty sure that that's the field, but that's okay. We'll get rid of that just to save time. It just has to be the right schema name. I don't think I put in the right schema name. But now if I go back to test after I fix something, so you see that there's an error, and then you can say, I'll perform the test. That didn't even. We got some successes, so that's good. So it's saying it ran successfully. You click on each of the steps in the test, then it'll actually show there's been 2 records that have been updated. So if you look under here, you can see 1 of 2. So it did exactly what we had hoped. And at least we think so. Based on this, you can see some of the outputs, and you can go to the next record. So it updated 2 records. You can go through and read all that if you want, but easier just to go in. We'll refresh this really quickly. So if I go into the record, it should have updated these contact records to 123 ABC Street. If I go in here, come on. Got like 4 video conference calls going on at the same time on my network, so apologize. And there we go. Now the child record has been updated. 123 ABC Street, contact record here. Go back. Look at the other one just to confirm. No, sorry. Go back to the account. Let's look at Paul. Paul has also been updated 123 ABC Street. So hopefully that just gave you a little flavor of what Power Automate can do out of the box. As you can imagine, with all these different connectors that are available to every application under the sun, you know, the possibilities are endless with some of the things you can do, especially with some of the transformation. You know, we talked about those expressions and things like that. It gets a little more sophisticated when you're doing some of those formulas and whatnot, but you can make these super, you know, sophisticated with the branching and logic and everything else. So the list goes on and on and on of the possibilities of this. So I hope that, gave you a flavor of what it can do for D365 and how to replace the workflow, but also want you to just kind of think outside of the box of different possibilities for your organization and how you can use this, not just within D365, but to leverage the capabilities and automations across multiple applications, because every organization has a gazillion of these applications. Some of them are integrated, some of them are not to some level, but this really opens up the door to a lot of possibilities. I've done a lot of talking here. Any any questions?
So Juan has a question.
So there's also, as I mentioned, there's a whole laundry list of updates coming out as part of this Wave 2 update for Power Automate specifically.
Todd, just
Oh,
one
sorry.
minute. Sorry
Is there a
about
question?
that. Yeah, Juan had a question. He asked, how do we move it from prod from staging?
Oh, that's a good question. So hopefully if you built it within a solution, as I mentioned, oh, not that one. If you build it within a solution, once you get out of here, so there is a way, if you look at the top, you can just turn on, turn off. But this is specific to your environment. You can also do a number of other things. You can save as, you can send a copy to somebody, submit as a template. So if you want this to become a template that you can reuse multiple times and just build off of for different things, you can do that. You can also export it from here, but in order to actually export it, and so you could do it that way, you could do the export and import from environment to environment, but the way I'd recommend is doing it through the solution. Since we created that solution, you can just close this and go back to your make.powerapps.com. It'll tell you that you're currently adding a new flow. When you're done, just hit done. And you'll see that that flow is in here. So when you do it this way, when you go to export here, you're going to export this solution. And you'll notice it actually pops up, and you're going to do unmanaged. So you just export this. It'll export it as a zip file. So it's exactly the same as the process for exporting and importing a solution from one environment to another with D365. You just kind of build that flow within that solution, export it, download it, hit save, and then you would go and you'd flip over to your other environment. So you can just flip over to your production environment, assuming I'm in the sandbox, but I only have one. And then you would just hit import. And then it actually pops up the classic import. If you'll notice, this is just like the old one. I assume they'll change this eventually, but for now it's the exact same. And then you just choose the file and hit next and import it in. And what that'll do is it'll change that connection and to that specific environment that you're importing it into automatically. If you do it through the flow thing, then you have to go and reconnect and do all these different things. So it's much easier just to import, export it as part of the solution. And a lot of times when we're building these things, we're building it in addition to a whole bunch of other things. So we include that all in a single solution, and that way we could just export it, import it, in a single step. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Yep. Any other questions?
I don't see any right now.
So try not to bore you with all the October release highlights, but there are quite a few coming out that are pretty exciting. I don't know if anybody uses Win Automation, but Microsoft acquired them maybe a year ago and is now building all these things in. So Win Automation was like a really built out automation tool, and now they're integrating Power Automate with that to basically leverage all these other automations that they didn't have previously. So it's really enhancing their product. So they're building in all the Win automations. Eventually, I think they're going to just fold the whole thing in, but for now, it's kind of a step-by-step process. They're just plugging it in so you can connect the two and then you can, trigger a Win Automation integration through Power Automate, which is pretty cool. There's templates, so there's going to be a lot of Teams integration that they're doing with this. So automating things in Teams. When I create a new project, you can have it go and do a whole bunch of stuff for you. Something that we use for project management on our projects, and so this is something I'm really looking forward to, in that we could, every time we set up a new project team for an upcoming project, we can go and we can create an Azure DevOps board. We can, all these different templates, and have it do all these things for us automatically, all the stuff that we do, when we're setting up a project. So I'm excited about the Teams integration that they're enhancing. And then the UI flow, as I mentioned, that's the one where it records your actions like a macro recorder almost. They're doing a ton of enhancements there. I think they realize, as you probably have going through this, that it takes a little bit of technical expertise to build these things out right now. And so if you don't have that kind of expertise or experience, as much as you can go through and fight through it and probably figure it out, there's tons of blogs out there. But I think Microsoft realizes this, and they see that UI flow as being a way to mitigate, some of that, to give the average end user the ability to just go in and say, oh, this is what I want it to do. Just click here, do this, click here, go to this application, do this and do that, and it records it and just builds a flow for you in the background. So they're doing tons of enhancements there. So I'm pretty excited to see what that's like, and I think we'll try to do a little bit of a demo on that for our next user group.
Well, it's 10:32. Anybody who has any questions moving forward, you've got all our emails, everybody that's on the call, if you got any questions, we can do any follow-ups with you. Feel free to email us out. At the same time, our next one is going to be on the 17th of September to do part 2 of this series. So just want to keep you guys updated. If anybody else that would love to see these be part of the virtual events, feel free to send them the invitations as well. But we appreciate you all joining us this morning and being part of this. Hope you find it valuable, and we will be in touch very soon. So thank you, Todd. Thanks so much for your information today.
No problem. Thanks, everyone.
Have a good day, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you.